Buckle up for AEC Trailblazers, the Founders Files, where we crack open the stories of the brightest minds in the AEC startup scene. Forget institutional pitches. We're diving deep into the real personal journeys of these industry disruptors. Get ready for some casual chats firsthand.
Hello. Welcome everybody again to the AEC Trailblazers podcast. We are here today with us, Chris Diggins. Chris, do you want to say hi?
Hello.
Chris is a software developer, entrepreneur, instructor, and technical communicator. His passion is solving software-related problems and making software more effective and accessible. With over 25 years of experience, that's a lot, Chris, he has worked with, in first-class companies such as Autodesk and Microsoft. In 2018, he founded his own AEC startup, Ara 3D. He's the proud father of 2 teenage girls and a 3-year-old yellow lab named Bernie. Anything else to add, Chris?
Yeah, that's some of the most important stuff about me.
Yeah. Well, the lab is a really important thing. Like we all labs, all the attention goes to your dog, right?
Oh yeah, he's my first dog, and he's an important part of the family. Very sweet, very emotional dog. He just loves people. In the words of Tennessee Williams, stranger is just a friend he hasn't met yet.
Sure. It's like labs is just a crazy thing because it's like you feel betrayed because if you're not there, they're gonna find super quickly another best person to play. Like, you're not my favorite person now. You're my favorite person now. You're my favorite person now. It may behave like that, right?
Yeah, my wife always says that I have to take advantage of whenever he offers me a toy, you better take it, you better play with it. And so he has his routines, and when he offers us an opportunity to play with him, we take it because, like you say, you'll move on to the next person.
Yeah, absolutely. Can you tell us a little bit about, where are you based, Chris, first of all?
Okay, so I'm based in Montreal, in Canada. I moved to Montreal in 1992 to actually study music at McGill. I've lived in a few cities across the world. Not that much of the world, but let's say I've lived in Seattle, Toronto, but I keep coming back to Montreal. It's one of my favorite cities, though I love to visit many cities.
Nice. Yeah, I see that you're going to be soon in Barcelona, but before you give us more details about that, can you tell us a little bit about yourself? How you started? I know you came from a different industry and then you moved to the AEC. So if you can go to the start on what did you study, or how was the beginning of the Chris we know?
So it's an interesting story, I think. I started programming when I was a child. We got an Atari 400 around 1980, 1981. Once you got bored of the 2 or 3 games we had, I started learning to use the basic programming language and make my own programs and games. I put that on hold for a few years when I became fascinated with music, playing electric bass and studying classical tuba. And I eventually went to Montreal to study at McGill classical music. While studying music, I took some electives in computer science, and I realized, oh my gosh, this is easier for me than actual playing music. I have more talent. So I said, well, I have 2 choices. I can either be a musician who programs on the side, or I could be a programmer who plays music on the side. And my calling was actually programming and computer science. So in university, about 94, I switched my major to computer science. And I've been just fascinated with programming and software development, and worked in many different fields. My first field actually was neuroscience, working for a professor at the university. Many things happened. Started a couple businesses, worked for different enterprises. Eventually, I found my way to Autodesk, I think in 2008. And I actually started at Autodesk as a technical writer specializing in programmer documentation. So my responsibility was to create and manage the documentation for many of their media entertainment products. So the 3ds Max, Maya, Motion Builder, and others, even Softimage to a degree. So while I was doing that, I realized that I wanted to help developers become better programmers. And I was always programming on the side. And I was like, well, the only way to do that would actually be address the issues with the APIs. They were too hard to use. So documenting them was kind of beyond, was kind of pointless at one point. I was like, they just need to have better designed APIs. So I moved to the development team and worked there for several years. So the interesting thing is after working at Autodesk for several years, I realized that in order to make big changes in the industry, I was going to actually have to go up and work by myself. So that led to me starting my own business, Era 3D, and I started to work on a specific problem, which was how do you get good quality geometry out of Revit and into game engines and other 3D tools. A friend of mine told me, he says, here's an open problem. The geometry that's generated out of Revit today is really poor quality if you need to bring it into a real-time engine. So artists have to generally throw it away and then remodel it from scratch. They said if you could solve that problem, you could do quite well for yourself. So that led to the initial ideas that drove Era 3D and allowed me to create a partnership with a company called Vim.
Cool. It's just interesting that you started doing documentation, which is something that most developers don't want to do. So thanks for that, and thanks for improving the 3ds Max API. My first job was, or my first gig, don't call it a job, was doing algorithms for my teachers, or my architects were my teachers at the university, and I used to do automations on 3ds Max for them to do renderings faster, and it was hard. So I wish Chris would have been there to provide me an easier API. But how was your first interaction with the industry? You moved from documentation into different products while you were out of this. You already knew 3D geometry. That's where you learned 3D geometry. How was the transition?
That's interesting. So here, it's kind of a funny story about the documentation. I had co-written a book, and I had used to be a regular contributor to leading programming magazines like Dr. Dobbs Journal, C++ User Journal, because I did a lot of research and I wrote about it. And I had started my own businesses before. And the problem was transitioning to, I wanted to get a job as a full-time developer, but when I applied to places like Microsoft and Autodesk, they didn't see me having a traditional programming background. And so I was not able to get a developer job, even though I was recognized in the industry as an expert. So they said, oh, you're right. Well, here's a job. And it turned out to be an amazing job. I loved it. I had a lot of fun. But I got pigeonholed as a documentation person, even though I'm a published author and expert in C++. Okay, but it was kind of fun. Now, 3D, it's kind of funny because you have to understand that I really am like a programmer's programmer. I think about computer science, about APIs, libraries, algorithm, data structures. That's what I'm really passionate about. And I don't know a lot about the industry. My first experience in 3D was actually while I was doing the elective during music. I had my tonsils removed. And I'm sick, and I'm lying in bed. And I'm saying, well, what can I do? I was like, oh, well, let's do a cool computer program. I have hours and hours, and I'm on painkillers. So I designed a 3D box drawing program with perspective. But I did it from scratch. I didn't know, I was terrible in mathematics. But I was like, you know what, let's figure out the perspective issues. How would I do this? I like problem solving. I showed it to a professor, and he's like, what book did you use? I'm like, none. He's like, well, what math classes are you taking? I'm like, none. He's like, okay, what year are you in? I'm like, I'm a music student. He's like, okay, well, when you finish your degree, come over and work for me. I was like, wait, well, I'm self-taught about the mathematics. I've learned through the years, and I've managed to work with really smart people who've taught me what it was that I was doing and start to understand the theory behind it. But that was my first experience with 3D. But working at Autodesk was kind of like the point of it for me was to learn about the software development process at scale. How does a large company build software? I just knew how to do it for myself, but I didn't know what it would be like working in a team or working with groups of people. So that was my introduction into the software development industry. I happened to be specialized in 3D. And then as I did that, I started to meet and work with architects, because a lot of architects were using 3ds Max for visualization. So I met some amazing people. And that's how I started the ball rolling in AEC, meeting all of these amazing people who are using 3D software to do amazing things.
No, I feel that I bet you met a lot of architects that are getting into the development world as well. Not only architects, regular architects, right? Like myself, which like I'm just curious, and we have already spoken about this many times, but like what do you think are the advantages and disadvantages of like being an architect who code versus like a regular developer who thinks in terms of like architecture and processes and DevOps and algorithms more deeply, right?
You know, I'm spending more and more time working with people who develop software for the AEC industry, and, you know, successful, you know, startup owners and successful people are the ones who understand they understand deeply the problems that people have. So let's say if the question is do you want to be successful developing AEC software? I think you need to, you know, be partnered with somebody who is who's an expert in that space. I think it's more important to actually understand the problems people have than the theory of software itself. So, you know, I've studied for many years, you know, computer science, but it's not that relevant to using computers to solve problems. And in fact, it can be a blocker. So software developers, we have a lot of kind of like baggage and assumptions that aren't actually relevant to the problems at hand. So my experience has been that people who know less about software development theoretically are more effective in the industry, because they don't see constraints. They're just like, okay, here's the problem I want to solve. I'm going to find a way to solve it. And, you know, I think that's a really, really important thing, is determination and a focus on what it is that you're trying to achieve. So I know I haven't exactly answered your question, but I think the question is what's the difference between software developers working in the AEC industry versus AEC professionals doing software development? I think they both have something to offer. There's a few things I want to say about the industry, though, as a whole, is that there are some people that think they know more about the limits and capabilities of computers, and it's a bit of a shame, because a little bit of knowledge, I think we talked about this the other day, a little bit of knowledge can be dangerous, right? You may think that, oh, well, Revit can only do this, and therefore this is only possible. And when you kind of break that down and you say, look, I want a certain level of performance, or I want a certain level of capability, you can achieve it. But it's very important to realize that, you know, sometimes the limitations might come from a limited understanding of hardware, of software, and whatnot. The point is use your imagination. But the other challenge that people are having is that they don't actually understand why certain things are slow or not performing well, or what the actual problems are. And they're just making assumptions. And that's where like study and having, you know, a deeper theoretical knowledge can be useful.
You said that you didn't give me an answer, but you gave me an amazing answer. Like, I do agree that, like, if I'm going to lead a product for the industry and I have the knowledge of the industry and I know the pain points, right? I'm really good at customer discovery process, on understanding what are the pain points, and like it's amazing on being an architect. And also, even I feel at the beginning of a company, if I want to put together a POC, it's great. I'm an architect. I can quickly put together, even if I don't use code, I can even use Dynamo or on any other stuff. And it's amazing because it's something limited that is not going to be there for production purposes. I feel that the error is trying to think that you're going to be able to go to production with doing an amazing product if you have limited capabilities in terms of the technologies. That's what I think. But I think it's a good thing because you can keep being the product owner, the leader of the product in terms of vision, and even understand a lot of what is happening because you have some skills in software development. But it's good that you can partner up with a software developer who can tell you, like, you can do whatever you want. It's not limited. It's just a matter of how much money you're going to put into it or what you want to accomplish, right? Yeah.
To kind of add to that, one of the interesting challenges I have when leading software development teams is helping the developer to realize that a prototype is important and it doesn't have to be production quality. They have a hard time letting go of their assumptions about the tools that they need to do. So, for example, you mentioned that a prototype based on Dynamo can get you really far. The most important thing is actually solving the problem and demonstrating it working. And if it's useful, then you've won. Developers have a hard time with that sometimes because they think that it has to be written in code. They think it has to be used technology A or technology B. They don't sometimes think outside of the box. Like you said, I did a prototype for a visual programming language for 3ds Max, and I did the prototype in MaxScript, which is like the little scripting language. And it was incredibly slow, but it demonstrated the vision I had, and the senior engineering team said, wow, we've wanted this forever. We're going to invest in it, and here's a team. I've had people kind of beat that out of me over the years. I remember showing a colleague of mine some code I wrote, and I was so proud of it. And he says, oh, I would have done that as a macro script in my text editor. And I was like, wait, that's cheating. And this mindset, this was a shift for me. I had been programming for over 20 years. And I was like, wait a second. There is no such thing as cheating. Why does my brain go there? Okay. And a lot of software engineers think that way. We know our programming languages. We know how to build robust software, but you can't start with that. You have to start with a solution. Now, the other side of the problem is, the flip side of the coin is that you can really paint yourself into a corner with your technology. Whereas, for example, I've seen a lot of people go, okay, let's start with Unity, build a prototype, we get really far, and then they're painted into this corner of this dependency on the Unity game engine, thinking like game developers, and you can really build a giant stack. And the secret is when to switch out of that. You have to leverage the tech in front of you, but you can't let it be your master. And that's sometimes what happens is, like, when you have a technically proficient founder who's not an expert software developer, they get enamored with their tech stacks and they tend to be fragile and they can't scale. So I think what needs to happen for people to be really successful is to know when to transition out of it and to not become in love with your tech stack. And I think that's one of the limitations I'm seeing with other startups. They've got products that are solving some problems, but they can't grow past a certain point. I don't want to name any names, but I've just seen this over and over and over again. No need to do it. But it happens in all industries. I feel it's a strategy like that. It's about timing. Hey, did you choose a technology that it's a limitation? It doesn't matter as long as you're growing the amount of customers you have and the amount of money you can raise or whatever, then you can migrate. The problem is it can be too late. You can get to a point that you have a big ball that it's so hard, so expensive to migrate that you will never accomplish it on time, or it can even be too early. Like, I know a lot of startups that they put together a product with, let's say, a Unity or any other framework, and then they only get 1 or 2 clients and they want to be like, I want this to be perfect. And they migrate to a different stack and then migrate again and they migrate again because they feel it's not enough. And the problem is it's not enough for them. And that doesn't matter. You need to take into account clients. So if it is enough for clients, or if clients are complaining about it, you can do it. But if not, who cares? Then don't do it. Like, I feel that the time is not only late, but it's also early. I'm laughing to myself because you put the finger really in French we say put the finger in the bubble, toucher bubble. You've hit a sore spot for me, and I think I've suffered from that. I've kind of gone through that mistake a few times, which is building tech that's even better than it needed to be based on the client's needs. And you're right, it really is timing. And I mean, I think every company also goes through a natural progression where you're like, well, at one point, the software has become used by too many people. You can't make the changes that you want to make. I mean, I have a lot of experience working with legacy software. And at one point, it becomes impossible to change anything substantial about it. And that's okay. And then the right thing to do is to start something new. But you're right. Timing, you can be too late, too early. But again, the same thing we're both agreeing upon, it is driven by customer needs. I think that's a good moral of the story for any entrepreneurs.
Yeah. Yeah, in general, not only like leaders of the industry, it's about ego, right? Like we feel that this is not enough for us. It's about our ego, and it is hard. We all have egos, and not in a bad sense, but like it's like when you want the product to be perfect because you want it to be something that you're proud about, and it's not about that.
Well, that's interesting you say that, because my advice, generally speaking, is what we're seeing, right? But I've also, at one point, just recently, realized that actually it's okay for me to, as a founder, to go pursue my ego. And in a sense that we sometimes think that every business plan has to have a bunch of metrics and a bunch of proof and all of this stuff. But sometimes you just have a vision and you need to get it out of you. A little bit like an artist. It's like there's a book inside of you. There's a piece of music. For me, it's a piece of software. There's a piece of software inside of me that has to come out. And it is a bit of an ego thing. I want people to use it. I want to be known for it. And I realized that that's actually okay to a degree as well. Just know that is what's driving us. And I think a little bit of an understanding. I also have to be humble at the same time to say, well, it's great to build a piece of software, but if nobody uses it, that's a problem for a lot of us software developers. We want to create things that are people use, but we just don't understand the users. Like,
yeah.
Oh yeah. And I agree. That's a valid point. It's about balance. It's like the timing, right? Like early, late, it's bad. Ego, too much is bad. If you don't have ego, it's also a bad thing because you're going to be derailed all the time by what people think. And you need like the sweet spot. Unfortunately, there is no manual on how to do it or when you are in the right balance. Yeah. So it's hard. It's hard.
Yeah.
And also, go ahead. Sorry.
No. You first. Finish your thought.
Yeah. I was going to say that it's kind of like what happens with architects lately. That I've seen many of them wanting to become software developers. Like you, as an architect, decide on design, you need to be a software developer, or you're out of the industry, or you're old, and that's far from truth. It's like, yeah, for sure, knowledge of tech, it's useful, but it's not a must to like be a software developer. It's not a must at all. You can be a UX UI designer. You can be a product owner. You can be like so many. You have so many options out there.
I agree with that. And I think it's important to not get caught up in categorization. We're never going to be the pinnacle of any one thing. We are, and we have value in our mixture of our perspectives. For me, there's something interesting to struggle with, because in the software development industry, there's a big focus on how smart you are and what, your brain power. And it took me a while to realize that actually people value, regardless of how smart or how logical they are, it's their experiences, it's their way of looking at things. Like you said, though, I mean, ego needs to be balanced with a little bit of hubris and humility. Because I think, you need to have vision and pursue it and be confident about it, but you also have to be humble. Coming back to the architects who want to be software developers, well, it's a bit funny for me because I'm like, well, do you really understand software development. A lot of people suffer from imposter syndrome, so they're trying to pretend that they know more than they actually do. And once you kind of accept that you're like, I'm valuable, you're valuable, you are because you've got an experience and a training in one industry plus knowledge in another, you have room to grow in both. But if you try to pretend that you're a software developer professionally, it's a bit of a problem, because you've got some gaps in your knowledge, right? When you accept that, you can move on and continue to learn and grow.
Absolutely, and it's about the right reasons. Like, you want to become a developer, for sure you can. It's going to take you a lot of time, and it's going to be your full-time job. It's going to be a software developer. If you're sure about it, go ahead. But in many cases, I feel it's just a matter of trying to add value to your career, which you need to be a full software developer to do that. There are so many different avenues. But
I agree with that.
I'm just curious on how do you see the market nowadays? I know you have had an amazing experience with when we met when you were working at with the Beam team. They're doing an amazing viewer that you had a lot to do with it. How do you see the 3D environment right now? Different platforms out there. What do you think about it?
Well, one of the things I'm noticing is there's been a lot of interest in real-time engines and what they could bring to the game, but that the problem is that there's kind of like forward progress and then it's backing up. Autodesk bought Stingray. Well, they bought BitSquid, which the BitSquid game engine, rebranded as Stingray, also rebranded later as Autodesk Interactive. I worked on that project. Then they stepped back from that and said, okay, well, we're just going to partner with Unity. That partnership didn't work out so well. Unity tried to do Unity Reflect. They broke the partnership with Autodesk. Then they discontinued Reflect. Then there was what happens Unreal was making progress on their Twinmotion acquisition, and there was growth there. And then they're saying that they're going to back away from this, change pricing models. So the point is though, there's still room for that. Like game engines, real-time interactivity, and game engine platforms, which are actually software development platforms, there's a role for them to play going forward. I find that to be really fascinating. But the truth is that everyone's still modeling in these really old tools from the 80s. It's like Rhino, Revit, SketchUp. I mean, these are all written 20 years ago. And I find it really fascinating when you talk about 3D, that's where the bulk of the work is done. Zapsoft, all that stuff. These are really, really old tools. So I think that there's some potential there to walk in and make a mark in that environment.
There is. Is it something related with what you're currently doing in Era 3D, or okay. You can say something about you can just play the fifth or something like that.
Yeah. So I've been, at Vim, we've developed, the team developed an amazing, high quality, real-time renderer. I was really fascinated with that. Part of the success was the fact that we realized that architectural models, they're static and they have a lot of repetition. And that allows us to make certain assumptions behind the scenes. So we were able to create a really powerful rendering engine that actually worked even better the more items you had that were repeated. You made certain trade-offs. Game engines were designed with other sorts of trade-offs and other sorts of assumptions that people were going to be using. Assets were going to be created by artists mostly, and they wanted high quality visuals as opposed to like being able to select items and to see everything in the scene. So I think that there's room to kind of play with that space and to actually leverage real-time technology and to do stuff that's modern, but on top of like without completely breaking the paradigm of how 3D modeling works today on a modern computer. Some people are focused, like a lot of investment is going into web-based technologies. Like, there's one company, Quantic is making a pretty big play in that and saying, look, we're going to do a modeling tool on the web. The last time I saw something like that, and which was quite successful, was Fusion 360, which was more designed for the engineering market. But they said, look, we're going to do a web browser-based modeling tool. I don't think that is going to be the dominant UI. I don't think people are going to be doing the bulk of their modeling work in a browser. I think there's a lot of tools, there's a lot of work to be done there, but I still think that the desktop is a very important tool, and I'm planning on focusing on that. Coming back to what I'm doing, I'm fascinated with the idea of what we in other industries, we call it procedural graphics. In AEC, we call it more parametric design. It's the same concept. It's basically the idea of using data and algorithms to derive steps of the design process. And there's a real fascination with this. How can we layer and modify things without recreating everything from scratch? I think, and I don't have data to prove this, but I really think that Grasshopper is growing in popularity because it emphasizes a procedural workflow, data-driven designs. People, when they're stuck with a model that was done by hand in Rhino, they're kind of frustrated because if there's any change in the design process early on, they have to recreate everything. So I'm curious how far we can push this. I saw the hackathon at the AEC Tech Hackathon last year, a project. Now, the name escapes me right now. It was a stack of rhinos. It was the idea of using Grasshopper to control Grasshopper scripts. And I was like, okay, this blew my mind. It was like, think about it, turtles on turtles. The infinite stack of turtles. But anyway, the idea was that some people were having success using Grasshopper to control the entire design process and to, say, respin up scripts. This called, like I say, they call it proceduralism, because the whole idea is that you've got data at one stage. And so if you just change the data with the requirements or whatever, everything could flow downwards. If you look at Revit, this idea is there. It's just not really acted upon, if that makes sense. Yeah. The idea is that you should be able to tweak an aspect of the design. So what I want to do, or what I'm working on, is exploring this first in kind of a free-form geometry way, like the way Grasshopper works. I did this for 3ds Max already. We did it for artistic. But my interest is in exploring this more at the data side. Why can't your constraints drive all your design processes? Why can't I say, look, this is my landscape, this is my bounding box, these are some of my design constraints, and I can actually code them early on, and they can stay relevant throughout the whole process, regardless of tools and regardless of what goes on. So I'm fascinated with procedural geometry, the idea of being able to create beautiful forms from mathematics and from data, because I'm not an artist. But I've always wanted to create things, but I found that mathematics and algorithms are a great way to be able to create things. So my focus is to spend some time there.
Well, you might not be a painter or a musician. Well, you are a musician, but creating stuff out of data and programming data, it's creative. So you can call yourself an artist.
Thanks. I did some courses at the master's level, and my supervisor said I was more of an artist than I was a scientist. He meant it as an insult, but I took it as a compliment, and I take it again as a compliment coming from you, saying, yeah, I think we have to embrace that creative side of us. I think that there's rooms for people that are more formal, more rigorous, more scientific, and there's room for people who are more creative and artistic.
Absolutely. You need both worlds. This has been super entertaining, and we might maybe record another session where we can go deep into 3D algorithms and all that. That's my personal opinion. That's my personal opinion because I'm a geek. But for now, we can maybe wrap it up. But before we go, can I ask you a couple of ping pong questions?
Fire away.
Okay. So the first question is, which is your favorite building in the world, and have you ever visited?
So right now, I think it's the Mobility Pavilion and of Dubai Expo 2020. No, I haven't visited it yet, only virtually.
That's cool. If you could, let's say you could collaborate with someone in history, who that person would be, and why?
Right now, I'm leaning towards Tim Sweeney. Tim and I have similar backgrounds, but are different enough that I would love to hear his thoughts on the programming language I've been working on. Him and I are both fascinated with programming languages, and he's a very smart guy. He seems very kind and generous with people. So I would love to work with Tim.
Nice. Best AEC software out there?
I don't think there is any. I think I want to see my own, but I don't think it's been invented yet.
Okay, good answer. And finally, the next big trend in the AC?
Parametric design. Even though everyone thinks it's been done, it really hasn't seen the full potential. So parametric design at scale, beginning to end.
Okay. Thanks so much for this enlightening conversation, Chris. It's been so fun. You're so bright and so humble. Can you tell everybody where they can contact you, know more about you?
I think the best way to find me is going to be on LinkedIn. I'm there all the time. That's my primary account. So look for Christopher Diggins and Era3D on LinkedIn. I'd be more than happy to chat with you and make a connection.
Okay. Great so much for your time, and hope we stay in touch. All right.
Thanks. Likewise. Appreciate it. Thanks a lot, man.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Thanks to our listeners. If you like this content, you can find past and upcoming episodes in ascworks.everse.com and at all of our Everse social media. We'd love to hear from you and recommendations for new content, so leave us a DM and we'll make sure to catch you.